Welcome to The Explainer. I'm absolutely thrilled you're here today because we're tackling a massive shift happening in the professional world right now. We're dismantling those outdated, emotion-driven models of leadership that, let's be honest, we've all been sold for the last 2 decades. You know the models that prioritize feeling good over actually doing good? Today, we're leaning on some fascinating new frameworks, including Dr. David Robertson's Reasoned Leadership 2.0, plus some really cutting-edge measurement data from the University of South Florida, McKinsey & Company, and Crestcom International.
So, let's dive right in with a pretty provocative question from the experts at the University of South Florida. Are you measuring leadership change or just measuring smiles? It perfectly frames our core conflict today. They point out that measuring a leadership program just by participant satisfaction, basically checking if everyone had a nice time, well, it's kind of like evaluating a fitness program by how much people like the gym music. It feels great in the moment, sure, but it doesn't build any actual muscle. We really need to stop measuring smiles and start measuring real, tangible behavioral change.
Which brings us to Section 1, the Leadership Thinking Crisis.
To fix this, we kind of have to understand how we got here, right? Over the years, modern leadership has essentially devolved into management-based pep rallies. There's this overwhelming expectation today for leaders to align every single decision with the emotional well-being of their teams, often at the direct expense of operational efficiency. But look, the solution isn't to just become a robot. The solution is data-driven empathy. This is where leaders integrate emotional intelligence, but they don't lose sight of analytical outcomes and organizational viability. Research from McKinsey actually backs this up, showing that organizations embracing data-driven decision-making are significantly more productive and profitable. So empathy is a vital tool, absolutely, but it shouldn't be the entire strategy.
Moving on to Section 2, why popular leadership fails. Let's look at the real-world consequences of what experts call the overcorrection problem. This is what happens when emotional validation totally supersedes performance. Take Sears, for example. Under Eddie Lampert, they tried a radical form of servant leadership, hyper-decentralized, employee-driven autonomy. The fatal flaw? Literally no top-down vision. It led to internal competition and total corporate collapse. Then, think about Theranos. Elizabeth Holmes was the textbook transformational leader. She had boundless performative charisma, she inspired total devotion. But it was all emotionally manipulative appeal with zero execution or scientific truth. And finally, WeWork. Adam Neumann used charismatic leadership to sell a real estate company as a lifestyle movement. Personality reigned over structure, resulting in unchecked spending and a spectacular crash. You see, these models sound beautiful in theory, but untethered from operational realities, they're highly destructive.
Now, you might be wondering, when these emotion-driven strategies fail, why don't leaders just change course? Well, it comes down to a fascinating concept called epistemic rigidity. It's basically when decision-makers become so deeply invested in feelings-based policies that they completely refuse to acknowledge clear evidence of failure. We saw this with rigid corporate work-from-home policies post-pandemic, where leaders clung to extremes instead of looking at the data showing hybrid models were actually optimal. We've also seen it in government and military recruitment policies, where sweeping ideological shifts are sometimes maintained despite severe recruitment shortfalls and readiness concerns. And look, regardless of the sector or the politics, when leaders fear disapproval more than they value success, they double down on failing strategies simply due to emotional entrenchment.
So let's look at the fix in Section 3, shift to reasoned leadership.
It is definitely time to pivot from the problem to the solution and introduce a new, intellectually rigorous framework for leadership science. The absolute crucial point here is the stark contrast between these two paradigms. On one hand, you have emotion-driven leadership. It's reactive, reliant on charisma, really heavy on perception, and basically just hoping things work out. Contrast that with reasoned leadership, evidence-based, driven by logic, and strictly outcome-oriented. True leadership is not about popularity, folks. It's about proficiency. It's about clarity of execution. It demands that we elevate reason above emotion, really grounding our choices in a clear understanding of the variables, not just our personal biases.
And the solution we're looking at is Dr. David Robertson's Reasoned Leadership 2.0. This framework demands logical thinking and objective analysis over whatever the current ideological fads happen to be. It completely rejects the inefficiencies of bureaucratic control, and it rejects those emotional indulgences of the management pep rallies we talked about earlier. Instead, it treats leadership as what it really is, an applied discipline governed by strategy and measurable excellence.
Which leads us right into Section 4, non-traditional success metrics.
So if we're shifting to this new, reasoned framework, the really critical question becomes, how do we actually measure it without falling back on traditional surface-level metrics like short-term revenue or basic productivity?
Well, Crestcom International provides a fantastic framework for this. Their first cluster of metrics focuses on team dynamics. You're looking at things like team psychological safety, meaning can your team speak up without fear of retaliation? Conflict resolution effectiveness. Does the leader address issues head-on to ensure long-term harmony? And idea implementation rate, because, it's great to brainstorm, but how many ideas actually get executed? Tracking these non-traditional metrics reveals the leader's true ability to create spaces that are open, highly innovative, and functionally independent.
And this seamlessly builds into long-term growth metrics. A reasoned leader doesn't just manage the present, right? They secure the future. Are they growing mentorship within the team? How resilient is that team when a massive setback hits? Are they building a strong leadership pipeline so the organization survives even if they, the leader, decide to leave? These metrics prove whether a leader is truly preparing the next generation and navigating adversity with focused, data-informed emotional intelligence.
All right, Section 5. Measuring real behavioral change.
Knowing the metrics is one thing, but tracking them over time to prove actual return on investment, well, that's where the real magic happens. We're leaning on frameworks from McKinsey and the University of South Florida here. Now, consider this number, 80%. What does that represent? Well, Hitachi Energy implemented targeted leadership development focused on real behavioral change, and within just 1 year, they saw an 80% decrease in salaried turnover. They also saw a 25% drop in hourly turnover. And let me tell you, this wasn't a coincidence. It is absolute proof of the massive business value of structured measurement and how better, reasoned leadership creates a truly stable environment.
So how do you actually achieve that? Let's break down the practical steps. Step 1. You absolutely must align the leadership learning directly with your business strategy goals. Step 2. Establish baseline metrics using multi-source evaluations. For example, McKinsey uses a brilliant mentorship sponsorship survey to see who is actually developing junior colleagues, not just who says they are. And step 3, you have to track behavioral change at 3, 6, and 12-month intervals. Behavior change takes time. You cannot assess a leader's impact on the last day of a 3-day training seminar. It literally requires intentional, longitudinal check-ins.
But here is the stark reality of where the corporate world is today. According to a DDI global survey, while nearly 80% of HR leaders believe behavior change is the most important metric, only 18% are actually confident in their ability to track it. Think about that massive 82% gap between intention and confidence. But honestly, that is an incredible opportunity. The organizations that actually build in structured follow-ups and multi-source feedback, they're going to leave their competitors entirely in the dust.
Which brings us to an incredibly powerful insight from the University of South Florida. They note that the most effective organizations don't just measure whether people learn something, they measure whether they've changed something, a mindset, a behavior, a concrete business result. This is the ultimate goal of reasoned leadership and proper behavioral measurement. Simply put, if you aren't changing something, you aren't leading. I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought. Are your organization's metrics measuring true leadership impact, or are they just hiding the next crisis? Think about Sears, Theranos, and WeWork. They all looked great on the surface, until they didn't. It is time to stop measuring smiles and start measuring strategy, logic, and outcomes. Apply this reasoned leadership framework to your own teams, and you won't just avoid the next crisis. You'll be the one building the future. Thank you so much for joining me in this explainer, and keep learning.